But tell me more. I don't want to gloss over this. I really want to understand this. Changing history. Okay, what was the history that used to be taught that now has been changed by the tyranny of the fringe?
Well, pick an area. We can talk about biology, where we have always had two sexes.
But what about history? Just to pick history, not biology, because you said history, biology. What about history?
Well, there's a lot of history to biology, and you would be missing a big point to pretend that there's not historical biology. But if you want to talk about history, we can, not in biology, but just talk about the history of mankind. Yeah. We've got areas where they don't want to talk about slavery. We had one a group of people that wanted to start describing slavery in history books as involuntary relocation.
Dr. Phil went on the David Pakman show and absolutely demolished David Pakman for trying to back Dr. Phil into a corner and trying to paint him as this bigot because he's not extremely woke like him and pushes back on all the woke nonsense that people like David Pakman try to put out there. Let's get into this clip here where Dr. Phil gets confronted by David Pakman and then absolutely destroys him for this confrontation. Let's check this out.
Interview. I've been watching some of the Fox News appearances, looking at the book, etc. I never really saw you as a guy who delved into political issues per se. You seem more willing, interested, and I must say maybe more conservative than I thought you were. Is that a fair assessment?
Not at all.
Okay.
Because I am so not political, you can't even believe it. And I'll tell you why. I know nothing about politics. And, and I know why you say that. It sounds like it. Right. I talk about these things as cultural issues from a psychological, psychosocial standpoint, how they affect families and people. And they do overlap with some of the things that politicians talk about. But they talk about it from a political standpoint, funding standpoint, how they can get this bill or that bill through, couldn't care less. But I am interested in those issues in terms of how they impact families in their day-to-day pursuit of life and peace and being able to raise their family in a healthy environment. So there's a lot of overlap, but I don't talk about it from a political standpoint because I frankly don't know enough about the politics of it all.
That's interesting. Well, politics, I mean, culture is politics now, really. Like they overlap so much that if you're conservative on the cultural issues, you're pretty much conservative on the political issues. In fact, conservative is not a political party. Republican is a political party that happens to align with a lot of conservative beliefs, but conservative is more like a cultural label, I would say. And let me know in the comments if you agree or disagree with that, but conservative is kind of a cultural label more than it is a political label. So I don't think Dr. Phil really answered the question there. I think a lot of people are so scared to get labeled as conservative because especially when you're trying to, whenever someone like Dr. Phil has been in mainstream media for a while. So if you're trying to stay on the good side of mainstream media, getting labeled a conservative is kind of like, it's a death mark. You're pretty much done. So I understand why he would try to be staying away from that label. But I mean, compared to what the alternative is and what you have to be to not be labeled as conservative nowadays, which is like you have to be clinically insane to not be labeled as that. If it's anyone who's not extremely woke, someone like David Pakman, then you are a conservative. Like Dr. Phil is a conservative for sure. Cultural conservative.
Willing to admit that. I'm just willing to admit it. I don't think a lot of other people know either. I'm just willing to admit it.
I don't want to make this like, famously there's this story of literary critics were talking about the symbolism in Ray Bradbury's Fahrenheit 451, and he would tell them, that's not at all what I meant. And so I don't want to make this where I tell you about how political all the stuff you say is, but the reason why I say it is a lot of the language in the book and when you talk about issues like immigration and culture and others, it seems as though it alludes to going back to the good old days, individual decisions in the style that many Republicans now talk about with regard to schooling and parenting, et cetera. But you're saying it's just not the case.
No, and that doesn't mean that there aren't politicians on both sides of the aisle that talk about these issues. But if you really think about raising a family in America, whether it's now or 50 years ago or 20 years down the road, we still have to keep our eye on what I think are core issues in America. And I think the backbone of America is the family unit. I really think that if we have strong families, if we have strong family values, and I think that our families in America, as you've heard me say and read me say, are under attack. And I think some of those attacks are unintended consequences of technology, for example. But these are things that, whether politicians talked about them or not, if they tried to legislate about them or not, I would still be talking about.
So give some examples of that. What are some of the attacks facing families?
Well, I think about 08, 09, we had what I think has been the biggest change to human life since the Industrial Revolution. I think before the Industrial Revolution, we were a very agricultural civilization, right? People.
If you enjoy content like this, then make sure you leave a like and subscribe to the channel. It really does help me out a ton. Let's get back to the video.
Worked on the farms. We grew what we needed. But then we became mechanized, and I think back then we were 95% agricultural. Now we're 1% agricultural. Why? Because everything is so mechanized and people move to the cities and all. Well, the biggest thing that's happened since then, in my opinion, was the advent of the smartphone. The internet became so prolific. And I mean, think about it. We're walking around in 08, 09 with as much computing power in our hands with smartphones, laptops, iPads, that we had when we did the moon shot. When we put a man on the moon, we didn't have as much computing power as we can hold in our hands as of 08, 09, and it changed everything. And people stopped being so involved with the reality of life and started getting involved in virtual life. And it's only gone more and more in that direction since that time. And also at that time, we started seeing the highest levels of anxiety, depression, and loneliness in young people since records were kept. And
I'm with you on this
changed.
one. I'm with you on this one. Jonathan Haidt has studied and written about this extensively. You and I are aligned on this one. What about the ones that fall under what you call the tyranny of the fringe? Because I don't think the smartphone example falls under that category, right?
No, that's why I say some of this is the unintended consequences of like technology. But then we've got some where we've got people that are just trying to change some of the core values in America, core values of family, trying to rewrite history. And we've got people that are coming in saying, well, we want to change history, we want to change what kids are being taught in history, we want to change biology, we want to change all of the things.
And there's only really one side trying to do that, right? I think it was Tim Pool who said one time, and this might have been requoted by somebody else, I don't know who originated the quote, but how it really goes today and how it's kind of always been, that's hence the names of the labels of the cultural, the cultural terms. But it's always progressives and liberals trying to say, let's change this, let's change that, let's tear down these statues, and let's change what kids are learning in school and everything Dr. Phil is talking about here. And it's conservatives saying, no, wait, don't. And that's always how it is. It's only one side trying to do these things that Dr. Phil is listing off. I wish he would just blatantly come out and say, yeah, David Pakman, it's your side doing this. That's my stance on it. And that's the truth. And trying to reason with these people like David Pakman, trying to reason with these woke people by saying, oh yeah, it's all caused by social media and technology and all this stuff. It's like, yeah, bro, obviously, but we've been saying that. People have been saying those same things for 20 years now. And it's gotten way worse. It's time to stop trying to reason with these people and make them understand why things have gotten the way that they are, and just tell them that they are flat out stupid and that they are wrong. It's time to just start saying that and start leaning into the fact that if you are conservative, which in today's day and age just means you have an ounce of common sense in your brain and you're not willing to go full on woke cult, then just lean into the fact that you're conservative, bro. It's okay.
Things that we have for 100 years had empirical data to support.
But tell me more about, I don't want to gloss over this. I really want to understand this. Changing history. Okay, what was the history that used to be taught that now has been changed by the tyranny of the fringe?
Well, pick an area. We can talk about biology, where we have always had two sexes.
But what about history? Just to pick history, not biology, because you said history, biology. What about history?
Well, there's a lot of history to biology, and you would be missing a big point to pretend that there's not historical biology. But if you want to talk about history, we can, not in biology, but just talk about the history of mankind.
Yeah.
We've got areas where they don't want to talk about slavery. We had one a group of people that wanted to start describing slavery in history books as involuntary relocation.
Right.
This was not involuntary relocation. This was slavery. And we've got people that are wanting to rename schools because people that were doing what were the mores and folkways of the times now would clearly be doing things against the law, certainly against mores and folkways, because they were slave owners at the time, are saying, well, now we have to tear down these statues, we have to rename these schools, and we don't want to teach about them. We have to learn from our mistakes as a society. We can't pretend those things didn't happen. They did happen. They were dark and ugly times in American history. We don't want to pretend those things weren't there.
So let me see if I understand, because there's a bunch of stuff. So if I hear you correct,
like David Pakman, he hears him correctly. You know, he understands what he's saying. But it's like these people do not want to accept what Dr. Phil is saying. They don't. And trying to reason with them and explain to them, oh yeah, this is a result of the technology age and everything like this. It's like, dude, it doesn't matter. Like, just tell these people that they're stupid. And honestly, like, it's not even worth giving them a debate. It's not even worth giving them the explanation anymore, because they don't care about your explanation. Like, what I've realized with these people, and I'm not saying just David Pakman in particular, I'm saying just these people in general, these woke people that Dr. Phil talks to and that he's talking about in his book and everything, they don't actually care about facts or truth or anything like that. They'll just say whatever. You know, like people like Cenk Uygur and these guys, they just literally just say whatever as long as it aligns with their side. And they say it with such conviction as well. They lie, like they tell blatant lies with such conviction. It's kind of scary.
You're not in agreement with those who want to minimize the tragedy and brutality of slavery, but you also want to keep the school names. If a school is named after a slave owner, you're also okay with that because it will remind us and we will learn from it. Am I understanding that correctly?
I think you're oversimplifying what I'm saying. What I'm saying is, if you're wanting to change American history to pretend that these people did not exist, and you want to measure them by today's yardstick rather than the yardstick at the time, that's what is referred to as presentism. And that's like saying, okay.
Well, I do think that's stupid. I will say, I'm not that big of a... So, like, if somebody is famous and powerful and they only got a school named after them because they were a slave owner, I think we should change the name of the school. And I know people are going to disagree with me on that. People are going to get mad, whatever. That's fine. I don't think people should be celebrated and, have that position of power because they were a slave owner. Now, if it's someone who was like a general, a war general, a president, I don't think we need to be tearing down statues if they accomplish something that was other than being a slave owner. Like, they're not just powerful because they owned slaves. If they accomplished something, if they moved the country forward and there's statues made out of them, schools named after them, memorials made of them, we should leave them alone. And they accomplished things. They helped our country. So that's my stance on it. I think if the people didn't do anything except for own slaves and they just happened to have a local school named after them because they were very powerful in that little area, then yeah, change the name of the school. Fine. That's no problem. But if they actually did something, like I said, if they were some kind of general or they were a president or some kind of leader or just accomplished something and they own slaves at the same time, we need to leave that stuff alone and teach people about them. Let them be honored in school names and statues and everything like that. Let me know in the comments, though, what you guys think about Dr. Phil's appearance here on the David Pakman Show. I think he absolutely demolished David Pakman whenever he tried to push him into a corner. But at the same time, I wish Dr. Phil would just sit here and tell David Pakman, yeah, I am conservative, because if you're not a conservative in today's day and age, that means you're absolutely insane, because everybody who is not extremely far woke and aligns with David Pakman completely, they get labeled as a conservative. So yeah, I guess I am a conservative. I wish he would have just said that, but let me know in the comments what you guys think about Dr. Phil's appearance here on the David Pakman Show.